It is now time for our final interview of the morning with Chairman of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, Congressman from Kentucky, James Comer. Thank you.
Let me get news of the day, like I talked to Congressman Auchincloss. So your reaction to Super Tuesday results?
I don't think there was any surprise. I mean, to me, it's been clear for quite some time we're going to have a rematch of Biden versus Trump, and I think that Super Tuesday last night pretty much wrapped it up, and that's, for better or worse, what our choices are.
That's where we're headed, absolutely. Okay, question number 2. Investigators in the House, and you're one of the lead investigators, interviewed Hunter Biden. Mm-hmm. Let's make some news. Or are we going to see public testimony by Memorial Day from Hunter Biden?
Of course. I mean, he wanted a public hearing.
He's going to get
the Democrats on the Oversight Committee wanted a public hearing, and I want a public hearing. I said we would have a public hearing after the deposition. This investigation's not being conducted any differently than any other major congressional investigation, where you bring everyone in for depositions and then you have a public hearing. Especially with what we have now, there are discrepancies in what 4 of Hunter Biden's former associates have testified with respect to Joe Biden's role versus what Hunter Biden said. So I believe a public hearing would be a good way to let the American people see who they believe, or if in fact, since all the deposition, all the transcripts have been released, everyone that's paying attention to the investigation can digest and pick certain points and determine whether or not what was said under oath. We'll give them another chance to edit what they said if they misspoke or whatever, because there were a lot of discrepancies in both Hunter Biden and Jim Biden's interviews.
And so we will see it by Memorial Day, maybe by Easter?
As soon as possible. I mean, look, we want to. The Oversight Committee is doing a lot of things. We have probably nearly 70 probes or investigations ongoing right now, but the media focuses on one.
That's absolutely true. That's true.
But yeah, we would like to wrap it up as soon as possible.
Okay. Well, one of the things that you have been investigating, and you launched it about a year ago, is in the practice of PBMs. What have you learned from that investigation?
Well, we've got a lot of problems with the way PBMs operate. We believe that in a bipartisan way, right, I might add, we believe that the PBMs are operating in an anti-competitive manner. PBMs were created like most entities through legislation with good intentions, but over time, unintended consequences have happened. And I believe that because of consolidation, you have 3 major PBMs that control over 80% of the market. Those 3 PBMs also are owned by health insurance companies. Now they own their own mail-in pharmacies. So they've become vertically integrated, and they've had I believe, a negative impact on the cost of prescription drugs for consumers. I believe PBMs have had a negative impact on competition, especially among community pharmacists. I believe they have an unfair competitive advantage. I believe they're doing a lot of things that are unethical at best and should be illegal at worst with respect to, I would even go as far as saying extorting fees from independent pharmacies. We're losing independent pharmacies. So I think especially in rural areas like what I represent, we don't have a lot of the chain pharmacies in most of my congressional district, most of the communities in my congressional district. They have independent pharmacies, but they feel like they're being extorted by these PBMs. They feel like the PBMs are adding costs to the consumers. So we're concerned about it. And fortunately, we have a lot of Democrats on the Oversight Committee. Katie Porter, Raj Krishnamurti. There are several Democrats on the Oversight Committee that agree with my concerns about PBM. So we've had a couple of very good hearings, and we've requested and received over 40,000 pages of documents. So we're trying to issue a report very soon, and then we'll have another hearing to kind of talk about the report and steps moving forward. But I will say this, we have actually acted. We're the one committee in Congress that's actually acted, and we passed the federal employee portion of the PBM Reform Act that will have a positive impact, hopefully, on the federal employee insurance plan and reduce costs for the taxpayers. And I think that we've shown leadership on the House Oversight Committee on this issue, and hopefully we can make a difference.
Now, critics of the legislation, including PCMA, say this is basically a smokescreen. The drug companies are setting the prices, and it's a distraction from them.
Well, the drug companies would say something totally opposite.
Yes, they would.
But I believe that there are so many states now that are focused on PBMs, and it's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's one of the few sincerely bipartisan issues in America. People recognize that these PBMs have consolidated, they've gotten too big, they are demonstrating anti-competitive behavior. And at the end of the day, the most concerning thing is most people that understand PBMs, whether they're in the state legislature or whether they're in Congress, realize that PBMs have actually added cost to the consumers. And I think everyone in America, whether you're conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican, rural, urban, we recognize that the cost of prescription drugs are on an unsustainable path to the average American, and the cost to Medicare and Medicaid for the taxpayers, it's unsustainable, and we have to focus on ways to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, and PBMs were created to do that, but because of consolidation, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, they've actually increased the cost to consumers.
What is the path for PBM reform? Talking to Congressman Auchincloss, a lot of disappointment that PBM language was not included in the funding bills, which obviously is headed at some point to the president's desk. Are we looking at lame duck, or could something be done before that?
I think something can always be done before. I mean, we moved on the Oversight Committee. We moved our part of the legislation. The Oversight Committee has jurisdiction over the federal workforce. So we took that portion of the bill and tried to demonstrate leadership to get momentum, to try to get Congress to act. Look, whether it's been a Democrat majority or Republican majority, Congress talks about this issue all the time, but nobody ever does anything. And I honestly don't know why. Everyone says, oh, you know why? I said, no, I really don't know why. I don't know why. And I think that there just has to continue to be a groundswell of support for this. And I think the encouraging thing from a congressional standpoint is you have so many state legislatures, whether they be Democrat or Republican, that are stepping up to try to reform PBMs, especially as it affects to Medicaid, because Medicaid is a bigger burden on the states. Medicare is our burden, the federal workforce is our burden, and we represent the American consumer. So shame on Congress for not doing more already, and that goes to both sides of the aisle. I'm very close with Brett Guthrie. He's my colleague from Kentucky. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I think Brett is very focused on this issue. The Energy and Commerce Committee is going to have to be the committee to lead on this issue. We've led on the portion of the bill that we have, but
and there's bipartisan support.
There's bipartisan support, and there's
yeah.
always been bipartisan support.
Right.
And every year there's more bipartisan support. There's some members of Congress that have no idea what PBM stands for.
Right.
And there are members of Congress that understand PBMs inside and out.
Right.
And very few, there are one or two that are defenders of PBMs. They coincidentally represent some PBMs in their district. But at the end, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, if you poll the PBMs among the members that understand what it is, there's overwhelming support for major reform. Now, I asked the question early on in the investigation with a lot of people, do we need to abolish PBMs?
Right.
And people say no. No, there's a role for PBMs. But what's happened is we've allowed them to get too big. And you don't hear many Republicans say that.
Right.
But about anything.
About 80% of the industry.
80% of the industry, and the fact that they're owned by the health insurance companies. They're also owned by, they also own the pharmacies. And when you've got a situation where people that go to a community pharmacist, they get a call from a PBM company that the pharmacy has to go through to get their medication, and their customer gets a call from the PBM and say, you can do it through this mail order, and they're steering customers. First of all, they're trying to steal customers from the independent pharmacies, and they are stealing customers. And then they're pushing them towards higher price drugs where they get bigger rebates from the pharmacies. The way the formularies are set up, the PBMs are incented to push people to prescriptions that they receive a higher profit on. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be for the consumer. The focus of what PBM's role should be to help the consumer have more choice, have lower costs. But what's happening is the focus now with the PBMs is which drug can we make the most profit off of, regardless of what's best for the patient. And I don't think that's a good business model.
Would you like to see the White House, which held a listening session on this issue this week, get more involved, push it, maybe mention in the State of the Union the president? I know you're not on the same Christmas card list as the White House.
I doubt I'll get a Christmas card this year. Feelings mutual, though. You know what I mean?
There you go.
But no, look, if you ever watch an Oversight Committee hearing, we have knockdown, drag out. We're not known for being bipartisan, but on this issue, there is bipartisan support. There are good governing members on the Oversight Committee in both parties. I could name 5 or 6 Democrats and 5 or 6 Republicans that actually want to govern on that committee and pass good legislation in a bipartisan way. I think it would be a good issue for President Biden. Probably should have done it 3 years ago. We're in the last quarter of his administration, but it's time. And I think that it would help. He could push the Senate to be more proactive. He could push Schumer and some of those guys. And I think it'd be a good issue for Trump too. I don't know that he's ever talked about PBMs. He may have, I'm just not sure. But I think that as more people in America understand what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years with respect to PBMs and their profits and what they've done to independent pharmacies and what they've done to the cost of healthcare or the cost of prescription drugs in particular, I think that there would be more support for PBM reform and a bigger push, because right now it seems to me who's leading the push to reform PBMs are independent pharmacies, and they've done a really good job. They've been a really good lobby on this, but it needs to spread, and there need to be more consumer-focused groups educating their membership about what this is doing to the cost of Medicare, what this is doing to the cost of Medicaid, what this is costing the consumers. And I think that at that point, you would have pressure to move quicker. But I'm disappointed that there hasn't been more legislation passed this session, because we've been talking about this issue for a long time. But hopefully our report in the next few months will shed even more light on the problem and the need to reform this in a significant way, and not just study it, because that's what Congress always does in these state legislatures. You get 2 lobbies talking in your ear, and the focus of a lot of members of Congress is self-preservation, and they say, okay, well, I've got a solution. Let's compromise. Let's just study this issue for another 2 years and kick the can down the road. That's what's been happening, and that's not acceptable.
You know former President Trump very well, and he calls members during COVID. He called me to complain about a story that was accurate, but he didn't like it. Have you talked to him about this issue, or do you plan to say, hey, maybe this is an important issue for people? Yeah,
I don't. The media acts like I talk to Trump all the time. I think I've talked to him twice since he left the presidency, but no, I've never talked to him about PBM, but I would if he wanted to talk about it. I'd love to talk to him about it.
I do. You mentioned that you have a lot of investigations that the media doesn't focus on. What else is on your agenda for the rest of the year?
I think the PBM reform is a priority. With respect to the investigation, if you go back to November 14th of 2022, when it was the lame duck session, right after the midterm elections, it was the first week back after the midterm elections when the Republicans had flipped the House, but we didn't take office until January.
Right.
I had a press conference. You can Google it on C-SPAN, 33 minutes. I spoke, Jim Jordan spoke for a little while. Then we answered 9 questions. And never was the word impeachment mentioned or anything else. What I said the purpose of the investigation was to get the American people the truth about the extent of what this family was doing. We had sources and we had read other reports and books and things about the level of involvement. But my focus and my goal as chairman of the Oversight was to pass legislation to prevent influence peddling. Because a lot of people in the media says, oh, well, this is a cottage industry. Well, what they did may not look good, but it's not illegal. I don't know that I agree with that, but there's uncertainty about what's legal and what's not, and what's ethical and what's not. And I want to have bipartisan legislation to define influence peddling, to increase the disclosure laws, to increase the ethics laws. This would affect the next administration, whether it be the Biden administration or the Trump administration. And there'll be things in this bill that neither candidate will like. But I think it's what we need to do moving forward, and I think it can help us address overall ethics reform, whether it be on the Supreme Court. You have liberals that complain about certain justices on the Supreme Court, or whether it be in the legislature. You have Republicans complain about insider stock trading with highly. The influence peddling is a bipartisan issue, and I think that you'll see something come out of that very soon. We have a lot of investigations with the SEC, with the Food and Drug Administration. Just about every agency has policies that are having a negative impact on people in the private sector. So that's kind of what the overall focus of our investigative role is.
That's very interesting. So that'll be the culmination of your oversight.
Absolutely.
This report and legislation,
Absolutely.
as you said. That,
and I said that in November.
Right.
If you go back and look at that.
And and you're going to stick to that plan.
Absolutely.
And do you expect that to come out by July 4th?
Probably. You mean the bill filed?
Or the report maybe first and then the bill?
Maybe, yeah,
Okay.
I hope.
And that's going to be across the board?
Across the, yes.
And do you think that's going to, have you talked to Democrats?
I have.
Okay, and you've got Democratic support?
I do.
Okay, because maybe there's some things they like and some things they don't like on
There's going to be there will be things that neither candidate likes,
Okay.
but I think 100% of the American public would support. So if you go back and you look at things criticism that Democrats have made of Trump or criticisms that Republicans have made of Biden, I think we can fix a lot of the problems because it's never been addressed. I mean, what is influence peddling? Is it okay for the president's family to mysteriously have millions of dollars deposited in their account while he's vice president for consulting or whatever? No one agrees with that. Now, you can criticize the investigation, you can say it's partisan or whatever. You can bring up Jared Kushner or whatever. At the end of the day, let's fix the problem.
Okay.
And that's what I want to do, and I think we can do that.
And so this will be across the board. So if there's a problem, it's going to be across the board for Republican and Democratic administration.
Well, it won't pass. I want the bill to pass. If this bill just picked on one person or one party, it's not going to pass the Senate.
True.
And that's a frustration I have with Congress. You have these members, they have these press conferences in both parties. They want to do these bills that they know darn well will never become law. It may pass the Senate, it'll never pass the House. It may pass the House, it'll never pass the Senate. It may not even pass the House. But at the end of the day, I want the results of this investigation. I want the truth. I don't want anybody to ever say, oh, this is a Steele dossier situation here. We've got subpoenaed bank records. We're going to have a report. And at the end of the day, I want to have an impact, hold people accountable for wrongdoing, but also fix the problem in the future because Democrats have complained about Republican influence peddling. Republicans complained about Democrat influence peddling. They've complained about it in the Supreme Court, in Congress.
And trading on somebody's name has been going on for
everybody. They say it's a cottage industry.
Yeah.
Well, if it is, let's fix it. And that's what I want to do, and I think we'll be able to do that. And I think people will be satisfied at the end of the day with the end result of this investigation.
We will be looking forward to that legislation.
Great.
Chairman Comer, thanks so much. Please thank the chairman
thank you.
for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman Comer, and thank you, Bob. That brings us to the end of our program. Thank you to all of our wonderful speakers this morning. On behalf of The Hill and our sponsor, Transparency RX, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in person and online. If you missed any portion of today's discussion, you can find it at thehill.com/events, as well as on our YouTube page. And thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.